Hey there and welcome back to NBA 2K17. My name is Pete and today I'll show you 3 possible moves to make with the Dallas Mavericks in NBA 2K17's MyGM or MyLeague mode. Before we get started, as usual, let's have a look at the Mavericks situation, and we can safely say that the Mavs are simply not a great team this year. The aging Dirk Nowitzki is still the team's best player, but he's 38 years old and there is a real chance that he retires by the end of the season. Newcomer Harrison Barnes is a whole 14 years younger than Dirk and the second best player on the team, and also the only other player with a rating of 80 or above. Rounding out the starting 5 is Wesley Matthews at the shooting guard, and then at point guard and center you have 2 viable options each. At point guard you can choose between Deron Williams or JJ Barea. The game defaults to Williams, while Barea is actually the higher rated player. At center, the choice is between Andrew Bogut or Salah Mejri. Bogut has the higher rating and is your default starting center, but keep in mind that he is pretty damn injury prone. Let's switch over to the bench, and the deepest position here is without a doubt the point guard, where either Barea or Williams, depending on who you start, battle for minutes with Devin Harris. It has to be noted though that all 3 guys are well in their 30s and probably on the decline, so this luxury won't hold up long. The Mavs also have Jonathan Gibson, who's listed as a point guard, but we'll get to him in a second. The shooting guard position has Seth Curry off the bench and that's it, but that's where Jonathan Gibson comes back into play. He's listed as a point guard but is actually better suited to play the shooting guard, where he would end up with a 72 rating, the same as Curry. The small forward has Justin Anderson and Dorian Finney-Smith as viable backup options, plus Nicolas Brusino as benchwarmer. And despite lacking any real depth, the power forward is probably the most exciting on Dallas' bench with 25-year-old Dwight Powell, a young guy not in his prime yet and already pretty good, one of the few bright spots in Dallas. The center then has either Bogut or Mejri, depending on who starts, plus AJ Hammonds, who isn't going to play much but has the age factor on his side. Definitely a few interesting players here. Let's have a look at who comes off the books once the season is over. The contracts of Deron Williams, Andre Bogut and Jonathan Gibson expire. That's potentially 2 players from your starting 5, although Bogut can be extended. Additionally, you have a bunch of team options coming up for Salah Mejri, Devin Harris, Justin Anderson, Dorian Finney-Smith and Nicolas Brusino. If you decide not to take any of those team options, then Anderson, Finney-Smith and Brusino will become restricted free agents. Let's also have a look at draft picks, and as a team with a rather dark outlook for the upcoming season, it's good news that the Mavericks have all their picks in 2017. As a matter of fact, they have almost all of their picks for the next 4 years, with the exception being the 2018 second rounder. And to complete this first overview, a quick look at their cap space. Rather large contracts for Nowitzki, Barnes, Matthews and Bogut bring the Mavericks above the cap in 2017. However, for those of you who play MyGM and care about money a bit, not into the luxury tax. That cushion is relatively small, however, so keep it in mind when you make any trades. In the season after that, the Mavs potentially have a bit under $12 million in cap space, however that does not include any team options or contract extensions, and simply to fill the roster we need to have a few of those. Before we get into the moves, here are your 3 key questions that need to be made in year 1 with the Dallas Mavericks. Number 1. Who will start and who will sit at point guard and center? I talked about it briefly a few moments ago. The choices here are not necessarily easy as the players are very similar, and apart from Barea having a slightly higher rating than Williams, no one really has an edge. I suggest you simply play a few games and see who fits your playstyle best. Question number 2 is, what does your draft class look like? Feel free to familiarize yourself with the draft class, because chances are you'll pick early, so see which positions are more available than others and plan your trades accordingly. And then the third question is a hard one to answer. Are you willing to trade Dirk Nowitzki? Me personally, I wouldn't do it in 1,000 years, but you might be a little more ruthless than me and try to trade the veteran for a younger piece of draft picks. With that being said, for a realistic approach in this video, I consider absolutely untradeable, of course, Dirk Nowitzki, Harrison Barnes, Wesley Matthews and Dwight Powell. You might see that differently, and that's of course not a problem. For this series, however, I try to stick to low-profile moves, and including any of those 4 players would kind of negate that. And now, without any further ado, here are your 3 moves to make as the Dallas Mavericks in year 1. Now, before we start with the first real move, there is one low-key adjustment that I would like you to at least consider. And that is, think about changing Jonathan Gibson to shooting guard with point guard as his secondary position, because his skills seem to be better suited for the 2 guard, and that improves his player rating slightly from 71 to 72. And with an already stacked point guard rotation, that might actually be a good move. And now let's get into it. Here is your first real move. Trade for a long-term big man. Face it, you'll need someone down low for the next few years. Without even talking about Nowitzki, Bogut and Mashry are both pretty injury prone, and you are one long-term injury away from a pretty big problem. Both of them are also not getting any younger, and while 30 and 31 isn't too old to play, their ratings will likely go down soon, or at least not increase any further. The only other player who could realistically back them up and be of service is Dwight Powell, who is bound at the power forward spot with Nowitzki getting older and older. Now, AJ Hammons might develop into a low to mid-70s player, but that's 2 to 3 years down the line and you need someone now. At this point, a friendly reminder, if your draft class is heavy with centers and you're confident that you can grab one, you can of course skip this move. If however you decide to go for it, then you can put up a package of Devin Harris and either Bogut or Mashry. The reason for trading Harris is rather obvious. He will be a third-string point guard at best, and he doesn't have the age on his side to outlive his competitors Barea and Williams. For now, his trade value is relatively high, but his rating will decline in the next season, so trading him now makes sense. For Bogut and Mashry, the same logic applies. Trade them while they're hot, or at least lukewarm. Since we're going for a center, the loss of one won't hurt, and we're getting rid of one potential injury problem. If you can get a big man without trading Bogut or Mashry, then that's great, but at least with Mashry I wouldn't worry too much about losing him. Now, a possible trade would be the aforementioned package of Harris and Mashry for Tariq Black and whatever the Lakers want to get rid of. This could be Huertas, Robinson, or Metta World Peace. You could also go with Harris and a second rounder for Willie Cauley-Stein, however Cauley-Stein is also 1 or 2 years away from contributing. You could also do straight up trades of Bogut for Ashik, Chandler or Jefferson, however that's probably not winning you much. If you want to go a bit more high caliber, then consider Darren Williams and AJ Hammons for Dieng and Hill from Minnesota. This gives you 2 more big men without losing either Bogut or Mashry, but it's probably a bit overkill and a bit lopsided as well. I went with Harris, Mashry and the second rounder for Black and Robinson. This strengthens us down low without weakening the point guard rotation too much, and Powell, Black and Robinson, given that you can bring him back in free agency, are 3 pieces for a potentially intriguing big man rotation. And that brings us straight to our second move, which would be to trade Darren Williams for a younger backup point guard. For Williams, once again, the trade him while his value is high logic applies. And yes, he is one of the better players on your team, but you are a losing team, so the loss of one of your better players should not be that big of a concern. Also, his value is pretty damn good for a 32-year-old player on an expiring contract, and with that you also have 2 perfectly good reasons to trade him. What we're looking for is a point guard who is considerably younger, someone who can develop on the bench while Barea starts, and then take over the starting spot ideally in the final year of Barea's contract in 3 seasons. With those criteria, your targets would include Austin Rivers, however that would bring you into the luxury tax if you made the move one like I did. Alternatively, Corey Joseph or Tyler Johnson, who is a shooting guard but can also play the point guard position. But attention here, his contract will skyrocket to over $19 million in 2018, including a 1-year option after that for the same value. Because of those small problems that Rivers and Johnson bring with them, my rather straightforward trade was then Williams and Brusino for Joseph and Wright. After those 2 trades, your rotation should look something like this. Barea switches into the starting lineup, Matthews, Barnes, Nowitzki and Bogut stay, but keep an eye on the rather low minutes for the 2 big men, we want them to stay healthy above all. Then we have a rather deep bench with 6 players who get minutes. I acquired Joseph to back up Barea, but that can be someone totally different on your team. Then Curry and Gibson share minutes at the 2, with both of them also able to back up the point guard. This gives you a lot of flexibility and you can easily make adjustments depending on who has a hot hand. You'll also see that I have no backup at the small forward. That is because Barnes will play heavy minutes and the rest of the time Matthews will slide in there. You could also give a few minutes to Justin Anderson, but then you will have a packed 12-man rotation unless you cut somebody else. Despite trading Mashry, we still have a strong frontcourt bench mob with Powell, Black and Robinson. And frontcourt is a good point because that brings me to move number 3, and that would be to bring Andre Bogut back for cheap. For a player of his caliber, Andrew Bogut is very willing to take a cheap deal when you want to re-sign him during the season, so even though he's getting a bit old, take advantage of that and lock him down for a few more years. Even if he won't be starting caliber material, he is still a very capable center. And that concludes our 3 moves. How your season will go is hard to predict. You might or might not make the playoffs, largely depending on injuries to your core players and a little bit of luck. If you do squeeze in, however, don't expect to go far. After the season, Nowitzki might retire, but more often than not he won't. In my playthroughs, he almost always came back for one last year, which is obviously nice. Depending on your regular season luck, your pick can really land anywhere between 1 and 25 probably. If you really want a high pick, then adjust the moves and shift your gear to tanking a bit more. If you followed my moves step by step, then I would probably draft a small forward or shooting guard because there is a bit of a talent gap between Barnes and Matthews and their backups. Now if you have a chance to draft really high, then I would avoid those 2 positions because you're set with 2 good starters here, and I would go with best available at either point guard, power forward or center. When it comes to team options, you have Anderson and Finney-Smith, who are cheap and still developing, so I would take them. If you followed my moves, you also have Tariq Black, who is an interesting case. His team option is worth about $6.5 million for 1 year, but if you decline and make him an offer in free agency, he is extremely happy with only $3 or $4 million and a longer term contract. On the other hand, however, you have the risk that he decides for another team. This one is of course up to you. I went with the free agency option and re-signed him for $3.5 million a year on a 4+1 year deal with a team option. From the Corey Joseph trade, I also have Wright, who we might also be able to bring back for cheaper in free agency, but that's approaching greedy here. I took his option and moved on. Before the regular free agency starts, you can also offer a contract to Gibson, and I would do so. He will be pretty cheap as well. If you grab Thomas Robinson, then you can also extend an offer now if he's willing to hear you out. Sometimes he's not, and you have to wait until the regular free agency period starts. You will very likely have to juggle cap space a bit here. Don't focus too much on Robinson though. There are a lot of other interesting power forwards available for little money. For example, I grabbed myself Patrick Patterson for a few years. You won't be a big player in free agency, and the moves you make won't really make or break your franchise, so play around a bit, and if you're ready, start the next season. And that's it from my part. Those were 3 ideas for moves to make as the Dallas Mavericks in MyGM or MyLeague. Let me know in the comments below what you would do with the Mavs, and I'm especially interested in your opinion on trading Dirk Nowitzki. If you want to see more videos like this, click the playlist on the top left, where I continuously upload videos for all 30 NBA teams. Or if you would simply like to show your support to the channel, click the small trophy icon on the top right and subscribe. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Cheers!